Welcome back to the Fire Break. I'm Steve Wolf. As you know, the Fire Break is sponsored by Team Wildfire, developing innovative new technologies for putting out fires using jet engines. And I'm pretty excited because we expect to see some of those jet engines rolling out this year, April. So keep an eye out for that. So when we're rolling out, of course, we don't want to run over anybody, anything like that. That would be an example of like basic situational awareness. But I've got Dr. Rich Gasaway with me here today. And Dr. Gasaway is going to be delving much more fully into situational awareness. And I guess the first question I would ask you, well, first, welcome to the show. How are you?
Thanks for having me, Steve. I appreciate it. I'm doing fine.
Really excited to have you because you're pretty well internationally known by all the situational awareness experts as their go-to expert. You're the, like Robert Duvall is to actors, right? So I guess my first question about situational awareness, which is often referred to as SA, just to add another layer of complexity, would be, what is it? Because I imagine if you asked any 100 people what it is, you get 110 different answers. Is that right?
Oh, well, actually, when I'm talking with a layperson, which is just somebody who hasn't immersed themselves into the deep dive of learning about situational awareness, and I ask them what it means, I get a pretty consistent answer, which is, well, it means you got to pay attention. Well, it means you got to keep your head on a swivel.
These aren't wrong, right? But
they're not wrong, but they're kind of used as a cliche or a catch term or a way of saying something that you don't really understand a deeper meaning of. What does it mean? If you ask somebody, well, what does it mean to pay attention? They'll probably say it means keep your head on a swivel. And they kind of go in this spiraling vortex of attempting to explain what they don't really quite understand. So what I have done is dedicate myself to helping individuals and teams understand that situational awareness is there's a lot more to it than just paying attention and keeping your head on a swivel. So directly to the question, what is situational awareness? By definition, my definition.
Which I'll say is the definition, right?
Yeah, no, it's not the. In fact, when I was doing my doctoral research, I found about 7 different definitions, depending on who's swinging at it and what perspective they're looking at it from. And I don't think any of them are wrong. They're just different ways of looking at the same thing from a different lens.
So from a different academic lens.
Yeah.
And does that translate into a different practical approach?
Some of the lenses tend to be a little bit slanted toward the theory side, the academic side, and the ones that I see that are slanted that way tend to come from people who aren't practitioners.
Okay.
So when I was looking at situational awareness, I was looking at it from what does it mean for me, boots on the ground, as a field responder? How do I need to understand it from that lens? And while it's built on an academic foundation, because it, as I look at it, I look at it from the perspective. I did my research on the cognitive neuroscience side of situational awareness. So there is some academic foundation to it. In other words, it's not theory. It's based on science of how our brains function. And especially I focus on how does it function when we're under stress, and how does brain function change when we're under stress, which then influences our ability to develop and maintain our situational awareness. So let me give you the definition, and then we can just build on it from there. Situational awareness is a person's ability to perceive and to understand what's happening in the environment around them while being mindful about how time is passing. Because as time passes, if you're in a dynamic environment, as time passes, conditions will be changing. And as those conditions are changing, well, then so should your awareness change. Otherwise, it becomes stale or outdated. So perceive and understand what's happening in the environment around you while being mindful about how time is passing. And then, and so it's a 3 part. So those are the first 2 parts: perception and understanding. And then the third part, it turns out in my research with first responders, is the most valuable and yet the most difficult. And that's really where situational awareness becomes the challenge, is that the most important part, or the most valuable part of it, is the one that I see most people struggle the most with. And that is being able to accurately predict what's going to happen in the future, and to be able to make those predictions in time to prevent or avoid a bad outcome. So it's a 3-step process of perception, understanding, and prediction. And I think that responders and even people that work in industry are pretty good at perception. That's the perception part, is keep your head on a swivel. That's the pay attention to what's happening around you part of situational awareness. I mean, and obviously you can't have situational awareness if you're not paying attention. So when somebody says it means pay attention, they're not wrong, but they're only describing the first part of it. There are 2 more component parts to situational awareness beyond paying attention, because it's very different to see something versus understand what it means, or to hear something or someone versus understanding on a deep level what they really mean, even beyond maybe what their words are. What's the deeper meaning behind what I'm seeing or what I'm hearing, or a combination of what I'm seeing and what I'm hearing. But I think that most people are pretty good at having perception, keeping their head on a swivel. I think for the most part, as long as they have some experience, they're pretty good at understanding or comprehending or making sense out of what they're seeing and hearing. But where I think the struggle comes is, especially in a dynamic environment, especially where there's stress and especially where there's risk, the challenge comes with mentally being able to, I don't want to sound psychic or anything, but I'll use the word teleport, but that's maybe a weird term to use, but to project your thoughts beyond where you are in the moment, to be able to see where the incident is going to be 2 minutes from now, or 5 minutes from now, or 10 minutes from now. And as I'm explaining this to people, I say, this is exactly how you drive a vehicle. When you're driving a vehicle at highway speed, your eyes are not looking 1 foot in front of the bumper. That's the here and now. That's where the tires are going to be passing over in the next 10th of a second.
Right.
What you do when you're driving is you look into the future. You look onto the horizon. You look out ahead of where you're going to see potential roadblocks or potholes or obstacles or things that you can then maneuver, slow down, maneuver around, find another way through without, getting yourself into a bad spot. So that's what the prediction part is. But I think a lot of people caught up in the stress of a moment struggle with realizing that they need to look ahead of the incident, to look beyond what is happening now. And I think a lot of them get surprised by what happens, where someone looking at it after the fact, although I will acknowledge they have the benefit of hindsight bias, but somebody looking after the fact can easily see that if that person in the moment would have done some projection into the future, if they have some experience dealing with the problem. Novel experiences are much more difficult to predict outcomes in novel experiences. But if they have some experience with it, that a reasonable person would believe that with experience you could make reasonable projections about what's going to happen into the future. And I'll often get asked, how far into the future do we look? Well, that depends on depends on the speed at which the conditions are changing.
Okay.
If you're driving your car at 2 miles an hour, you don't need to look 900 feet out ahead of the front bumper. But if you're traveling at 70 miles an hour, you probably do need to look 900 feet out in front of the bumper because of the speed at which things are changing. So if the speed of change is slow, you're looking to the future could be 10, 20 minutes, 40 minutes, an hour. If conditions are changing quickly, you're looking to the future could be 30 seconds to 2 minutes.
Okay. And so you have lists of what you can dismiss and what has to be part of your take into accountability now.
Yeah. I coach in my classes. I coach people on the process. When I have a class and I'm teaching how to have perception, how to develop understanding, and how to make predictions, that takes me 3 hours to explain how we do it. But and the reason I take that amount of time is I want people to. It's kind of like in a car. If you get in your car and you turn the key and it starts, then you really don't need to know much about how the car operates beyond turn the key and it starts. But if you turn the key and something starts squealing or clicking or grinding and you don't know what that is, then you don't know what to do. So what I try to build is the deeper understanding of what's happening under the hood, so to speak, but under the hood is actually inside the brain, so that not only can they recognize that something isn't right, but they can take some proactive measures to try to manage their way through the challenge that they're facing. So that in the prediction part, what I do is I suggest that they, if you're in some situation where you perceive there to be some risk, and that's usually what the type of situational awareness that I'm teaching is, that in environments, the people that if something goes wrong, somebody could get hurt, somebody could get killed, there could be a significant impact on a company, that kind of thing. So what I try to do to help them to think about the future is to inventory in a moment while you're doing something, pause and inventory the bad things that could go wrong. They haven't gone wrong yet. So what you're doing is you're taking an inventory of the things that could go wrong. Now, when I suggest that people inventory it, I'm not talking about making a list of 20 things. Impossible. Mm-hmm. Impossible. You can't do that in the moment. So right. What I suggest is just to inventory a list of the 2 or 3 highest probability things that could go wrong. I mean, literally, if you think about it, Steve, anything is possible to lead to tragic outcome. Anything. I mean, while you and I are talking, a plane could land on my house while we're talking, and we lose the feed, and you wonder what happened to me, and find out later I was killed by a plane that hit my house. Well, there's no way I can have situational awareness about that or have predicted that.
You keep Flight Tracker up on your computer all the time?
It's right here in the corner, yeah.
Right.
So what I suggest is just making predictions about, or making an inventory of 2 or 3 possible things that could go wrong, the highest probability things. And depending on the kind of environment a person works in, they can actually start making that inventory in advance of ever being in the situation. So you think of like a wildland fire, if you're out on the line, you could think well in advance of being out on the line, what are the most common things that go wrong that cause these wildland firefighters to get hurt or killed? What is that small number of the most frequently occurring things? And get that in mind while you're working in the moment. Get in mind what are the highest probability ways that this could go off the rails. And then the next question that dovetails with that is, how long will it take for one of those bad things to happen? Yeah. So what we're trying
Will
to
you
do,
have warning basically that it's
yeah,
happening?
what we're trying to do is create what I call a window of opportunity. The
Okay.
window of opportunity, as long as the window of opportunity is open, I can do proactive things to change an outcome, make things better, accomplish a goal. But know all the while, so long as there's risk and consequence present, the windows of opportunity are closing. And those windows of opportunity, one of them are the windows of my safety and my survival. As long as I'm in an environment that has the potential to be hostile and changing and could harm me, the windows of opportunity for me to survive in this environment are closing. So what I want folks to do is to think not only about what are the 2 or 3 highest probability things that could happen, but then think about how long is it going to take. In other words, if I could say it a different way, how fast are the windows of opportunity closing? Because if the window of opportunity closes and I'm there where the bad thing is going to happen, then I'm going to become a victim of the outcome. And I really encourage people that I'm teaching this class to not get in the way of outcomes that they can't change. Sometimes we can step into a evolving event and proactively do something that stops it from becoming a tragedy. And sometimes we can't. And knowing the difference is going to keep us from being able to not be in the way of a bad outcome that we can't stop. Because if we're in the way of it and we can't stop it, we're just going to become a victim of that bad outcome. So being able to inventory the small number of bad potential things and then get into our mind a timeline as to how quickly those things can happen. And then asking the third obvious thing to ask is there anything that I can do, or we, if there's a group of people working, or, a cohort of people trying to solve the problem, is there something we can do that can slow or prevent that bad outcome from happening? Or should we get out of the way of it because we're not going to stop it?
Okay. If
But
the wind
this
changes,
is
I'm going to
future
be
thinking.
breathing that cloud of methyl ethanol that's leaking out of the tanker. If the wind stays the same, we're good. If we treat that building like a structure fire, we have an idea what to do, but we didn't anticipate that the Twin Towers would actually collapse, and that was a completely random thing from the perspective of the experience of the people going into it.
Yeah, I wouldn't call it random. I call it novel.
Novel. Okay.
Yeah. Novel
Right.
meaning first time ever experienced. And we're not very good. We're not very good at making predictions about things that we have never experienced. But we can build that experience by learning from the experiences of others. If we
Right.
had another plane run into another building, I don't think there's any trained responder out there who would not be thinking somewhere in the back of their mind something's blinking,
Yeah.
that could lead to structural collapse, where because it had not ever happened the way that it happened, it was novel, and therefore perhaps for some inconceivable that those buildings, that one could collapse, let alone two of them could collapse. I'm not saying the firefighters still wouldn't have gone in.
Exactly.
I,
Exactly.
I,
Knowing what right in hindsight, I believe they still would have done it and
I,
tried to get
I,
everyone out that they could before it went down.
I believe in all my heart that is a correct
100%.
statement. Yep.
Yeah. I'm curious. You talked about looking under the hood, and I imagine that what's under the hood has also changed if we take a long perspective, right? It wasn't until we developed the cerebral cortex and our ability to imagine things that weren't right in front of us and to predict into the future. And I would imagine that if you were alive today, you are the descendants of people who understood situational awareness intuitively in the environment that they were in, right? Because those who didn't got picked off by the lions and the tigers and drought or famine. Those who could anticipate, what was happening survived, and we're their descendants. So we have that, I'm guessing, in our favor. Working against us, though, is the amount of data that has to be processed now versus then, right?
Yeah, that's a good observation, Steve, because here lays the problem. And so as we talk about, we are the modern version of an evolved brain. We have to understand that brain evolution happens over the course of tens to hundreds of thousands of years.
Right.
Brain evolution the brain does not evolve over the course of 100 years or 200 years.
No.
Evolution takes longer than that to occur. And I don't think there's any biologist or anthropologist who would disagree with that. So, but here lays part of the problem is we still have, for the most part, a primitive, and I'll explain what I mean when I use the word primitive, a primitive brain trapped in a modern world.
Yes.
We've went and got ourselves in a big damn hurry and got ahead of our brain's ability to keep up with things. So let me explain what that means. If you think back into the early evolution of our species, we really only had we didn't have much to worry about back then, and we didn't have much to distract us back then, and we didn't have much to process back then. All we had to worry about was feeding, fighting, fleeing, and reproduction to pass our genes on to the next generation. You know, we weren't living in caves worried about, have I saved up enough in my 401k to buy that lake cave when I retire, and how's little Johnny doing in school? And it was a much simpler existence. And for the most part, until we got into the era of modern technology, starting about 120 to 130 years ago, it was pretty primitive. And then along came technology. So if you think about what's just happened in our most recent past, the invention of electricity, the light bulb, the automobile, the television, the internet, telephone, cell phones, social media, all of that has been bombarded onto our primitive mind landscape. And now we find ourselves very easily distracted, very easily overloaded and overwhelmed with too much information. You know, there are people who think that the more information I have, the better decision I can make. And that may be true in a non-stressed, non-dynamic scenario. Like, for example, I'm going to decide where I want to go on vacation in 2 years. Right. So now I take out the time compression and the worry about, I got to make fast decisions. And I take out the worry about finances because I can save up my money until then. And I have the benefit of the internet, and I can look at all these destinations, and I can even make a spreadsheet of the best and the worst of it. So in a scenario like that, where you can slow down the process of decision making, then more information may help you make a better decision. But in a dynamic, fast-paced, time-compressed, high-stress scenario, volumes of information are not our friend. It's our enemy, because it literally can paralyze our decision-making process. I know you've heard the term analysis paralysis. The paralyzation of the executive function of the brain, because it's just so saturated with information that it can't get it all put together and make sense out of it all. You know, one of the analogies that I use when I'm teaching the class is putting together a jigsaw puzzle. And I say our five senses are all gathering up pieces to a jigsaw puzzle. Eyes gather some, ears gather some, nose, mouth, skin, it feels, all gathering up pieces to a jigsaw puzzle, sending those pieces into a brain where eventually, in the second part of situational awareness, the understanding, the puzzle gets put together and we understand. Well, if you only have to put together a 7-piece puzzle, then putting it together and making understanding is a pretty simple leap. But if you have to put together a 1,000-piece puzzle, you can understand that the process becomes more complex, more time-consuming, and perhaps more frustrating on the decision maker because of the volume of information that they need to process.
Yeah. And so when there were earlier technologies, so like when there was one technology, the bow and arrow, right? Okay, so we could anticipate how the technology is going to work. And when I looked at the Lascaux cave paintings, I saw basically a tactical formation drawing around an animal, and where the positions of the weapons holders were, and where the positions of the chaser guys were. And you could see that they were, 30,000 years ago, thinking ahead to what the tactics of this situation would look like, so that they could run through it in their mind and then be prepared to execute on the plan.
Yep. Yeah, just like that. And in fact,
and it's very different than Gary Kasparov, and now he's got to think, 30 chess moves ahead. And different in an incident command situation on a wildfire where you're many more pieces of data, but the fundamental skill is there, but the application has become over such a wide area that it's so thin it doesn't work. Right? You can only solve so many problems with one brain at a time, and
right,
you have to dismiss the irrelevant information. Right? If I'm flying my plane towards Paris and I want to land there, I don't need to take into account continental drift and the fact that Paris is going to actually be a little bit further to the east than when I left, right? And now if I was taking a huge, multi-million year historical perspective, that continental drift would be significant. It's not a piece of data that we need to process right now.
That's right. And sometimes in our dynamic environment, people with good intention are sharing non-vital information. And the problem with that is we don't know that the information they're sharing isn't important until they share it and we process it, and then we say that wasn't important. It
sometimes with some anger too, right?
Because takes some of our horsepower, mental horsepower, to process the noise. The term that I would use for it, although I'm not talking about noise like banging, but the noise of non-critical information being shared. And if a person who's very well versed in the complexity of a situation tends to be better at not oversharing innocuous information, and those who understand less try to share more. And that's part of the problem we see with dispatchers. If a fire dispatcher who's never served as a firefighter ever can find themselves oversharing information from a 911 caller, the house is on fire and the drapes are green.
Right.
And why are they saying the drapes are green? Because that's what the caller said to me, so I'm going to share with you everything that the caller said to me. And where, say, a 911 dispatcher who has served as a firefighter is able to gatekeep that information and prioritize and only share the most important pieces of information. We have a class just for dispatchers about how to do that, how to sift through the noise and pick only the most important things that responders need to know in the moment. What are the things I need to know that are going to kill me in the next 3 minutes or 5 minutes when I get
make, model, color of the car, number of occupants, presence of weapons, hairstyle,
right.
Yeah. So you've got to gatekeep that for people. And then there's a lot of new technology offerings coming from companies intending to support situational awareness that are actually contributing to the noise overload.
That's right. I got to be careful. I don't want to get any software vendors angry.
Well, as long as you precede it with well-intended.
Yeah, there's a lot of technology out there.
Yeah,
that software engineers are developing, devoid of understanding how the human processes the information. In other words, they're IT geniuses, but when it comes to understanding the neuroscience side of it, they're completely devoid of understanding how the brain will process and make sense out of that information. And it's not just the information, it's how the information is presented. It's how it appears on the screen.
Yep.
It's the type of font, the font size, the color of the font, blinking things, sound making things. I mean, there's so every single stimulus is an input. I'd once had a software vendor at a conference invite me to preview their prototype new product. And when they did it, they were showing me this scenario of a fire in the downtown area, and they had all the fire hydrants on the screen blinking. And they said, "What do you think?" And I said, "First thing, turn off all that damn blinking." I said, "It's distracting." "Well, that's where your fire hydrants are." "Okay, I understand that, but every blink on that screen tells my brain there is a new piece of information to be processed. Every single blink. Now you've got 8 blinks going on simultaneously on this screen. You're going to overwhelm the receiver of that information. I understand your heart was in the right place,
right,
to put emphasis on the fire hydrants, but in the process, you're going to completely distract the receiver of the information and maybe even overwhelm them." And they're like, "Well, we never thought of that." Now, did they go back and change that? Thankfully, they actually had a toggle where you could turn off, like, be able to click a switch and say, "I found the hydrant that I need," and it would turn off the blinking. And I'm like, "Oh, thank God, turn that blinking off," because it's hard to focus, with all that distraction. But I think that there is a lot of technology where I think their heart is in the right place, but they're not collaborating with the people who understand cognitive neuroscience to make sure that their product interfaces well with a human. And I know you had Bart Van Leven on an earlier episode, and Bart is, in my opinion, something just short of genius about how to interlay the human side of thinking and decision making with technology. So in that area, I mean, he's a wizard. I mean, I am so enamored by hearing him, and I taught him. He's one of my master instructors, and I taught him the situational awareness side of things. But then he overlaid it with his understanding of technology and human interface to technology. And oh, what an asset he is going to be for those that want to listen to that connection, because the technology and the human side are intertwined. But if you develop one in a vacuum, devoid of the understanding of the other, it's probably not going to work out well. And we're seeing some of that. And aviation learned some of that too, because they were developing some technology that was beyond the capability of pilots. When they first developed heads-up displays on the airline, and this is a good example because we now have heads-up displays on SCBA's face pieces.
right.
When they first developed the heads-up displays on airplanes, what they did is the technology people found a way to display information so that it would appear on the glass window
Mm-hmm.
in front of the pilot. So the pilot wouldn't have to look down or go what they call heads down on technology.
Right.
They could just look straight out, and the information that they would need would be right there in front of them. Seems like a great idea until you understand that the eye cannot focus on the near side and the far side
Yeah.
simultaneously.
Right.
I mean, how did somebody miss this? So after they made this technology and they were testing it in simulators, these pilots were landing airplanes onto simulated runways that had airplanes already on the runway. Thank God it was only simulation.
Right.
And
They're staring at the numbers and not looking out the window.
Yeah, they're asking the pilots, well,
Yeah.
why did you do that? And the pilot would say, "I didn't even see that plane on the runway." Well, how could you not see it? It's right there in front of you.
Yeah.
If your focus is on the near vision,
Right.
you don't see what's happening on the far vision. Now, complicated, Steve. We there are things that we are in our DNA, we are hardwired to pay attention to things that represent danger in our environment. It's what helped us to learn how to survive in our early evolution, and it's still there and present and helping us today. And there are four primal tripwires to danger: things that are loud, things that are bright, things that are moving, and things that move toward us, like lunging, like a saber-toothed tiger, lunging at us. So you have on this heads-up display bright lights with changing information. That's two primal tripwires. And your brain is naturally going to pay attention to the brightness on the heads-up display and the moving and changing information on the heads-up display. And it's absolutely predictable that you would miss what is happening beyond the heads-up display because you're focused on the near vision. Now, SCBA face pieces for firefighters are now integrating heads-up technology, and it's getting more and more advanced because companies have the ability to advance technology. Just because we can doesn't mean it's good.
Right.
And they're advancing technology in prototype, putting more things onto the display, all under the belief that it will make firefighters safer because now you can see more information right through your screen or right through your face piece. But I think what we're going to end up with is responders that have good situational awareness for what's on the heads-up display and no situational awareness for what's happening 10 feet in front of them.
Yeah. Now, technologies like Quake, which allow you to see what you can't see because it's on the other side of the smoke, is a very complicated technology with a very simple user interface. I see the staircase, I see the guy in front of me, I see the fire, all things I wouldn't have seen without it. But when you start layering in, here's my pressure in my SCBA, and here's my skin temperature and my heart rate, eventually, it's too much.
Yeah,
so you have to really focus on it. I'm curious to know whether, because of the number of users that would be available for like your PlayStation and your Xbox, when my son plays, Medal of Honor, which he tried to teach me how to play, he can make use of exactly the information that they need, right? He can see where he is on the map, and he can see what's in front of him, and he can see like what his ammo level and his health level are. Not in incremental bits of data, but just overall, okay, here's your overall health, right? And I wonder, just because of the millions and millions of users of that technology, if those software engineers have successfully honed in on, how much data is someone comfortable with and how much of it is actionable, and then eliminate the extraneous.
It's a good question. I'm not sure I know the answer. I have an opinion on it, but I don't know that I have.
What's your opinion? That's what you're here for.
I'm not a gamer.
Yeah, I'm not either.
But what I would say because my son is.
Yeah.
So I have stood behind him and watched him play Call of Duty a few times. I mean, it's not an enjoyable thing for me. I mean, I'm not opposed to gaming, but it's just not something that appeals to me.
You've watched him respond to all the data on the screen pretty adeptly, I imagine.
Yeah, yes, but there's a reason. Repetition cycles of practice.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you look at a first responder who's got a heads-up display, and you say, how many repetition cycles are they going to have in practicing the use of that heads-up display in a real scenario? And I know Call of Duty is never real, but it's the fidelity of it allows you to believe that your brain can be tricked, so you can literally be put immersively into the game, and that's what they're trying to accomplish with their fidelity of the technology. But I think where gamers really have it figured out isn't that they're only getting limited information. It's the repetition cycles of practicing, of processing all that information that they learn. When I need to know something, I can glance to the right and there's that information. But when I don't need it, I can come back on track because otherwise I'm going to get shot. So I got to keep my eyes forward on the game, but there's a place I can go to look to see how much ammo that I have, or how much, and again, I'm going to look foolish to the gamers because I don't know exactly, how it works. But I would say where gamers get really good, and they do get really good, is through repetition cycles of practice, which anybody can get really good at something with repetition cycles of practice, but it takes a lot of repetition cycles of practice to get good and
Sure.
to maintain that proficiency. And I would say at least in emergency services, we probably don't get that amount of repetition cycles to be as dialed in as, say, your son or my son would be with gaming.
I would best bet though that it would benefit firefighters or all first responders, if the development team from Sony were to come work with them versus somebody who's just a software engineer just thinking about in their mind what the value of the numbers is without considering what the graphics and the interface and all of that. I think they'd be a richer experience.
It would be good technology. It'd be expensive to develop, and I think that's probably why it hasn't been developed to be, like the people who develop Call of Duty have probably spent many millions of dollars on software development, testing, integration, marketing, production, distribution, but in return have made millions more in profit. Right. Where in like our world of first responders, there's probably not the market to have mass production and sale of that. Therefore, you'd have a very expensive development of a product that would then be very expensive to operate. When I was doing my doctoral research, one of the things that I had the privilege to do was to go down to Atlanta and fly in a commercial airline simulator. Now, these are not the kind you see at the mall.
Right.
These are multi-million-dollar pieces of equipment. They're developed to train and test and keep skill proficiency of pilots. And when I got into the simulator, and it's fixed. It does move around, but it's kind of on a I don't know what you call it.
Hydraulic gimbal. Okay.
Yeah, like a gimbal. So when they accelerated, you get pushed back in your seat, just like when you're flying. Yeah. And I fly a lot, and everything about my flight experience was simulated in that machine. And right down to when you get to dial in what airport you want to land at. Okay, so they said, where do you live? And I said, Minneapolis. Okay, let's land at Minneapolis. And so they dial in Minneapolis Airport, and when you're coming in to MSP from the east, there is a highway that runs right on the edge of the airport. And when you're coming in on this simulator, you're seeing the cars going down the highway. And you wonder, well, why would they develop this with so much fidelity that it actually shows the cars when the cars really have nothing to do with landing the plane on a runway?
Yeah.
Well, they do, because
you're going to see it, and you need to know, I'm going to see it, but I need to not.
The cars are moving, which represents distraction. Yep. And so they had me. Well, they thought they were going to have me land the plane. I did such a poor job that I literally made myself motion sick.
Wow.
By the way I was trying to steer the plane, I was jostling the plane, and honest to God, Steve, I literally had a visceral experience that I'm going to crash this plane and die. I mean, I completely lost all concept of that I'm in a simulator. It was so real that for my mind, it was real. I was tricked. And I literally got sick. I mean, I didn't throw up, but I wasn't far from it. and I had to pass landing the plane off to the instructor that was in the other seat, and have him land the plane, because I was so fearful that I couldn't do it and I would crash. And then there would be this great consequence. I mean, it was a weird thing, because your logical mind says, this isn't real, but the fidelity of the simulation was so vivid that my mind was tricked, and it was real. And everything that I was doing, every switch, I mean, we simulated an engine fire and the alarms went off, and we had to, push the extinguisher to extinguish the engine. And if we could create that kind of virtual reality with that kind of vivid projection of the real environment, we'd have something that would be valuable to emergency services.
Because if you put yourself in that position in that simulator 100 times, 1,000 times, you're going to stop, feeling the motion sickness, and you're going to say, okay, I've been here before. I know what to do.
Yeah.
Right. Your confidence is there.
Yep. And one of the things that can happen too is something called stress inoculation. So, when you get stressed, your brain function changes. So, when somebody says, well, how can I manage myself through stress? I say, well, one of the ways to do it is to make sure that when you practice in an environment that is you can best do with an element of safety. Create an environment that is nearly as stressful as the real environment you're going to work in, and work your way through that in your training or in your simulation. And what you're doing is you're exposing yourself to the stressor, and then learning how to manage through those stresses. The example I use is a flu shot. When you get a flu shot, they inject you with the flu so that you can build up an immunity to that, to the flu. And that's what happens with stress inoculation, is we are injecting stress into a training or a simulation scenario so that you're building up a tolerance for how to manage yourself through stressful environments, and how to think your way through, and understand how your brain is going to change under the guise of stress. And the more stressed you get, the more impact it can have in influencing situational awareness, critical thinking, decision making, spatial reasoning. It reads like a book of horrors of what can happen to the stressed brain.
Right. Yeah, like it was right when the police found out that shooting at a still piece of paper is very different than shooting at someone who's shooting back at you. And then they switched to simunitions and even paintball and this and that, where now you have to practice the same marksmanship skill, but you have to do it under vastly different conditions.
Yeah, even with simunition, it's a whole different experience when the target's shooting back at you.
Right.
And you can be struck even with just the simunition or paintball or simulated projectile. It raises an element of stress, because you don't want to be shot, because if you're looking at the exercise seriously, you understand that getting shot could be death. It just doesn't mean paint on my clothing.
Right.
You understand viscerally there's a deeper consequence if I'm hit with that simunition round, which then adds an element of stress to that whole scenario versus shooting at a static target.
Right. Very interesting. So you said 3 hours to cover your first two topics, which were awareness and understanding, right? Or
no, it's three parts: perception, understanding, and prediction.
Okay. So is prediction the one that's the hard one?
Mm-hmm. It's the one I think that, from my observation and reading fatality reports and interviewing people who've been involved in near misses and tragic events, it's the one that they struggle with the most, and having difficulty in being able to anticipate the tragic outcome. They're operating in the moment.
Hmm.
Where, the best I could describe it is you got to keep one foot in the present and one foot into the future.
Right.
Pay attention to where you're standing, but also pay attention to where you're stepping, where you're going to step in it. You know what I mean?
Right. Right. Right.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so if you can, if one of the things that you could anticipate is that as the situation deteriorates, so will your ability to cognitively work through it, then you want to take advantage of the time where your cognitive skills are higher, to work through those things before they happen. So when they happen, you're implementing a plan rather than having to devise a plan. So I would call that the if-thenning phase, right? If this happens, then I'm going to do that. Then when that happens, I don't have to try to think about what I'm going to do. I can just put that plan into play.
Yes. That's a good way of looking at it. The if then type of cognitive processing. Part of the problem, and you said it, but I want to build on it. You said, if this happens, then I'll do that. Part of the problem is sometimes when that is happening, they don't know it. They don't see it.
Mm-hmm.
They don't understand. Sometimes they see it, but they don't understand it. So then now you see now we're connecting the dots between the three parts of situational awareness. It's like, why didn't you, when that smoke color changed to be that, why didn't you do something different? And people will say, well, I didn't even see that smoke color change. Well, how could you not? Look, here's a video. Well, I understand. I'm seeing it on the video, but I'm telling you, in the moment that it was happening, I didn't see it. Or in the moment, somebody said something on the radio and somebody didn't hear it. Or they acknowledged it.
You're wearing three radios and...
Oh, no, that's a fallacy. We cannot multitask listening.
Right, but I see people wearing multiple radios, thinking that they're going to be able to
they're
process all that, right?
They're only fooling themselves.
Yeah,
that is, and I can run an exercise that can disprove that in 30 seconds to anybody that wants to convince me otherwise, that they can. That they're good at multitasking the act of listening. However, let me say this, because I want to be fair. Remember that I said repetition cycles can help us to become better.
yes.
So when you look at dispatchers are often processing multiple audible inputs simultaneously. And with that practice, they can develop a skill on how to make better sense out of multiple competing auditory inputs. But for us, the average person on the street that's going to wear a bandolero of radios on a call once a month, that's not going to work out. That's just not going to work.
What else is on your list of not going to work out?
Well,
like in the in the Mark Twain sense, right? Not the things that you get in trouble. It's not the things you don't know. It's the things you know that ain't so. What are some of the misconceptions about
we humans think that we are better at operating in stressed environments than it turns out that we actually are. And when I talk about like my situational awareness class and the three component parts, perception, understanding, prediction, and I say it takes 3 hours to do that, then I spend the next 3 hours talking about how can it go wrong and what can we do about how it can go wrong. So, like, for example, one of the ways that can go wrong, and it's a good example, but I don't really have a good solution for it. In other words, it's kind of like saying if you drive your car a lot, the rubber is going to wear down on the tires. We know it's going to do that, but there's not necessarily a way to prevent it. There might be some ways to slow the wear, like keeping the right pressure in the tires and not doing burnouts and things like that.
Not doing dry turns.
But, one of the things that can happen is something that's called confabulation. And confabulation means that the brain is actually making up its own reality in the mind's eye. And now we have two realities. We have the reality out here, that's happening around us. And then we may have a completely separate, non-compatible reality that's happening inside of our mind that is fabricated. And I spend some time talking with my students about how does this happen? Because they think they're immune to having things like that happen to them. Like when I explain it, they're like, "Oh, that would never happen to me." And I'm like, "Really? You think that?" And they're like, "Oh yeah, I would never, I could never not, have my mind be on a different reality than what's really happening." And I said, okay, so here's what we're going to do. I'm going to run an exercise. And when I run this exercise, I'm going to ask you some questions about what happened in the exercise. And when you give your answers, you're going to lie to me. I'm going to ask you not to lie to me, but you're going to lie to me. And you're going to tell me things that absolutely are not true. And then I do the exercise and I ask them questions and they sit right there and they lie to me. And then I say, "Why are you lying? I'm not lying to you. That's exactly what I heard." "Oh, I don't doubt for a minute that it is exactly what you heard, but it is not what was said." And then I'll play it back from a second time, and
they'll see the monkey, right?
Yeah. And I'll play it back the second time, and they'll be like, "Well, that's not what I heard him say the first time." Then some of them will be like, "Well, that's a different video." I mean, they're in such denial that they can't even fathom that their brain confabulated a different reality.
And is that usually through like filling in missing pieces?
That's exactly what happens. Is the brain? You think about the puzzle pieces. In any environment, we're never going to have I say never. In a dynamically changing environment, we're never going to have 100% of the information. So when the brain puts the puzzle together, there's going to be holes in the puzzle because there's missing information. Well, when the brain looks at that puzzle and it's trying to understand and make sense, and there's holes in the puzzle, that's confusing. And the brain doesn't like us being confused, especially if we're in an environment that is risky. So the brain is going to try to resolve this confusion. And what it does, all with a good intent to resolve the confusion, is it goes into memory and it grabs other experiences and it fills in the holes that you are missing with what it thinks should be in the hole. And sometimes it gets it so close to accurate that we don't even realize that our brain has filled in missing information. And sometimes it fills information in with other information that is so inaccurate that we literally have a flawed perception of reality, which is to say the reality in here is not the reality that is out there. And the problem with that is a person who has a flawed perception of reality doesn't realize it's flawed because it's their reality. Complicating this, Steve, is the fact that our brains are very stubborn. And once we lock on to what we believe is our reality, it's really hard to let go of it and accept a new reality.
So you'll spend more effort defending that reality than being willing to look at an alternative one.
Absolutely. And the example that I'll give you to this, which just puts the exclamation point on what you just said, is in my classes, I'll always say, "Well, who's a fan of professional football? Okay, what's your team?" And they'll say a team. And I'll say, "Okay, who's a fan of a different team?" And they'll have a different team. And I'll say, "Okay, you, the person that's the fan of team A, is there anything that the person who's the fan of team B can do to convince you to give up on your team and be a fan of their team?" No. "How about for you, fan B? Can fan A convince you to give up on your team and become a fan of their team?" No. "What if I gave you statistics that showed you statistically that the team that you're not the fan of is actually a better team? Would that change your mind?" No. So it's really not about logic. It's about your emotional commitment to your belief of how right you are and how difficult it is to let go of it. And you will even find yourself becoming angry and argumentative and defensive to your position if challenged. Now, bring in stress. And the more stressed we are, and the more time compressed we are, and the more challenged we're feeling for, someone's calling into question our good decision making, the more we might find ourselves becoming defensive or protective of our own beliefs, which then we just dig in deeper and like double down on our beliefs instead of unlocking from them and realizing that we could have a flawed perception of reality. I mean, we're human.
Right. So can we make room for people to have that by telling them in advance, you're entering a reality distortion zone. Things are going to happen to your thinking that you're going to think are real, and we're going to tell you in advance that they're not.
Yeah.
And to make them more receptive, right, to pivoting.
Yeah, I have a series of things that I use to teach and coach on how to develop skills to help manage your way through some of these, what I call barriers to situational awareness, confabulation being one of them, stress is one of them, urgency, time distortion, auditory exclusion. There's a whole laundry list of them. But one of the things that I encourage them to do is to kind of manage their own self-perception, is to develop a mindset of being inquisitive, asking yourself, what does this mean? What's the deeper meaning behind what I see or what I hear? Or if somebody comes up, if you come up to me when I'm operating an incident scene and you say, Rich, I don't think things are going well here. Instead of me saying, well, what do you know? Or getting defensive on my plan because maybe I outrank you and I'm committed to my plan, that I be inquisitive. And I say, tell me what you see.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me what you hear that is giving rise to these concerns. Because you literally might be seeing things that I'm not, hearing things that I'm not, or understanding things differently than I am. And if my mind is open to the suggestion that I could have a flawed reality, then I'm more likely to be receptive of a different reality instead of doubling down on mine. Steve, one of the things that got me started on this whole journey of going back and getting the PhD was how many incidents that I was evaluating and looking at and saying to myself, how could so many smart, talented, experienced responders not see what was coming, not hear what was being said? And the really frustrating thing for me was how many times I could see that the train was going to go off the tracks, which is to say there was going to be a tragedy. And there were so many clues and signs and indicators indicating that it was going to happen that I wondered, how could they not see it? How could, and again, I got the benefit of hindsight bias, but how could I see what they couldn't see? And there were times, and it almost causes me nauseousness to say this. There were times when I truly believe they did see it coming, but did nothing to change it because they were so committed to their plan, so committed to the actions that they had put into motion, that they didn't try to stop it. And many times what they did instead of trying to stop it is they doubled down. Just like you defend yourself, they doubled down and threw more resources at it. So basically, instead of saying, trying to stop the train, let's put more people on the train. And you look at this, we look at this in our logical minds and say, that makes no sense. But then when you understand how, the deeper conversation of what you and I are having, it makes complete sense as to how these things can happen. So part of my goal is to help people make sense out of how and why these things happen, how we as humans are vulnerable to error. And we all are.
And everybody got a plan till they get hit.
Yeah. Who was it? Mike Tyson that said
Mike
that?
Tyson,
Everybody's got a plan till they get punched in the face.
Exactly. Yeah. So people see something coming, and they're so married to their idea of what's going to happen that the reality of their eyes goes away. Which is kind of the opposite of what you were describing in the simulator, where intellectually you're sitting in a simulator, but given a choice between believing what your body is feeling and your eyes are seeing and your ears are hearing, you go with your senses over everything, right? Because they're what's gotten you through.
Yeah, and there's more. There's more to it. Unfortunately, I wish I could say it's simply one thing or two
Yeah.
things, but there's more to it because when you when you see it coming, and you might not be able to see a bad thing coming, but if you see it coming, and then you stick to your plan, you could also, in addition to having your flawed perception be in play, you can also have overconfidence being in play, ego, bravado, um, past experiences of being in similar situations, almost as bad, if not equally as bad, if not more is worse than the one you're in, but it turned out okay. So now
Mhm.
you get the reinforcement of successful outcomes
Right.
that validate that you'll work your way through this one because you worked your way through one before, completely devoid of the understanding that you were successful the last time, not because of skill, but because of luck.
Right. This is the people. These are the people who don't leave when the hurricane warning is issued. Right. Because in 1968 they rode out the hurricane and everything went fine.
These are the people that go to the casino and win big once and think they can go back and make a living of it.
Yeah. Right.
You know,
Right.
because they're completely devoid of the understanding that if they win at the casino, it is pure luck. That every game is tilted to be advantageous to the house.
Is that really true? Just kidding.
Well, I'll tell you what.
I heard that rumor. That
Yeah,
the odds favor the house. Yeah.
let me let you in on the biggest secret that is not a secret at all. Casinos they build those beautiful casinos
Yep. On the
with the
difference.
money of losers.
Well, I would say they built the whole city based on the margin between reality and what people think is going to happen.
Right. Yeah, and in most casino games, they are designed, and with like slot machines, they're actually slot machines in some states are required by law to pay back a certain percentage of
Mm-hmm.
the till to the player. So let's just say that's 93% of everything that's put in is paid back. Maybe not to the person who's playing, but maybe
Yeah.
someone that's 19 machines away.
Right.
But 93% of it is paid back. So there are going to be winners, but there's going to be 7% more losers than there are winners. and that's
seven.
margin.
Right.
Yeah.
And that 7% of people have to cover the margin for everyone else.
Yeah, and apparently they do because there's nice casinos there.
No, but that's another area, right? Similar to situational awareness, in the sense that people think they have an understanding of it, and there's a tremendous amount of science that goes into it that is way below the surface. And your description is very similar, right? Like people think they know what SA is. They can recount 2 cyclical lines about it, but really have no understanding of the depth underneath it.
Yeah, and if I had to make the keep on the analogy of the gambling, are there gamblers who are better at it than others? Absolutely. The more you learn, and the more practice you get, and the more repetition cycles you're exposed to winning and losing, the more you understand patterns and the better you can get at it. And the same can be said about any profession. But no matter how good you get at gambling, you never, ever have odds that are better than the house.
Right.
You may have odds better than another player. And if you're playing a game where you're playing against other people versus the house, like say in Texas Hold'em, well, then I don't say it's easy. It's easier if you're definitely well versed in the game versus playing somebody who's a novice at the game. You'll clean their clock every time. And so people study to be good at it. But there's always an element of luck in gambling. There's always an element of luck in the work that responders do as well. So the more skilled and practiced you get at it, the more you reduce that margin of luck. But there is always some luck. So if luck leads to the successful outcome, and you're lucky over and over again, you can kind of get under the delusion that you've got skills that you don't have. Mm-hmm. What you really have is just a long series of lucky outcomes.
A streak.
And then the luck runs out, and then you have a tragedy.
Yeah, right. In terms of the technology, like putting more data in front of people so that they could supposedly make better decisions, where you just end up overloading the system and getting maybe worse output than you would if you had fewer inputs. Do you see a future where technology is used not to provide us with more inputs, but to parse the data and help create outputs?
I would hope so. I if I hold any hope for artificial intelligence, it would be that artificial intelligence could process volumes of information and distill it faster, more efficiently, and more accurately than a human could, and distill it and then give us just the right amount of information at the right point in time that we need it. That's a leap.
Yeah.
And until AI developers collaborate with with the humans that have to interface with it, in other words, the front end user responder, um, I don't know. I I don't know. I'm cautiously optimistic.
Okay.
I did some work with a company that actually was a governmental agency that has a you know what a super collider is?
Yes, I do.
Okay, so that's the business that they're in, and I won't go into the detail more about it. But I was interviewing as part of my assessment of this organization the people who work in a control room where their job is to monitor what's happening on computer screens. And one of the things they said are the computer screen interface is so user unfriendly
Mm-hmm.
that they end up getting confused and frustrated over the wrong information coming or at the wrong time or too many blinkers or too many buzzers or too many of this and not enough of this. And I mean, they were like vomiting out at me about this. So then I asked the end users, I said, well, how often do the software developers ever come down and sit in your chair and see what you do? Never.
Mm-hmm.
Never? Never. Well, there's the start.
Yeah.
Let them come and sit behind the chair and see what they've created. Now, what they'll do, the problem with that is when the developer sits behind the chair, the developer, because they know the technology so intimately, they'll be like, well, all you got to do is blah, 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 because they're the highest level expert of understanding what's going on behind the screen
Right.
in the development of that. They have the logic. What those experts, the software experts, need to do is sit and watch the end user try to interface with it and see their level of frustration, distrust, confusion, and then send them back and say, your job is not just developing technology. It's to develop something that reduces my frustration and my confusion and
Right.
brings clarity to me and the right amount of information at the right measure at the right time in the right design. And
Yeah.
that's
Yeah, and their own bias. Because I worked in the film industry for a long time, and I know that there are people when they go to a movie, all they're looking at is the hairstyles, or the props, or the wardrobe, or the makeup, because that's their thing.
yeah.
They couldn't tell you what happened in the movie.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
Very interesting. Well, Rich, I know we could go on for 7 or 8 more hours, I'm sure, and just wrap this. So what I'd like to do is just invite you back for another episode.
I would welcome it.
At your early convenience. And I'd like to dive deeper with you next time into the things that the individual can do to have a greater comprehension of essay soup that they're swimming in.
Yeah. I would welcome the chance. I'll talk to anybody, anytime, anywhere. All they have to do is just ask the question and know that I'm going to freely share everything that I've learned. I from where I was,
Yeah.
which was I was the clueless person who knew nothing about situational awareness, to where I am now. If somebody said to me, Rich, I want to learn everything that you would want me to know about this. How long would that take? I'd say probably a week, like 40 hours. I have a 22-hour online class that when I developed it, I thought, well, this is it. This is the comprehensive. This is the end all, be all, know all, everything you need to know. Online, 22 hours, self-directed. This is it. Well, I probably need to go back and make it 40 hours now. I mean, 22 hours.
Still, right? The fact that it took you, 40 years to learn it doesn't mean that it takes 40 years to teach it.
No. All I wish for is an open mind. And in fact, that's what I tell people at the beginning of a class. I'm going to share with you things that you're not going to want to believe, that you're going to want to throw frustration and anger at me for suggesting that your brain can do these things. Just give me the gift of your open mind. Because if you close off, if I say something that you don't like or you don't trust or you don't believe and you close off, you're going to stop learning. So just give me the gift of that open mind. Let everything flow in, and you can process it later and decide what you want to throw away. But if you decide in a minute that you didn't like something I said, you'll turn off to me, and then your learning will be done. And that would be a shame that you would sit here all day with me and get nothing out of it because you turned off to the belief that you could be influenced by confabulation or time distortion or auditory exclusion or fear or any of these barriers that
hunger.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Low blood sugar.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Fatigue.
The physiological part of it, that's a whole other element. The one thing that I stress very heavily to people is the importance of prehydration.
Mm.
Oil is what keeps your car from seizing up.
Right.
Water is the oil that keeps information flowing smoothly through the brain.
That's a great quote.
And when you get dehydrated,
yep,
you slow down the information passing through neural pathways. You actually get headaches from dehydration. And if you and hydrating after the fact, I mean, it's good for recovery, but it's not going to help you in the moment. You have to be pre-hydrated, coming to work and preloading water into your system until you pee clear. And I mean, I'm not trying to be gross about it.
Yeah, no.
But and pee clear all day. Yeah. And then you're properly hydrated for critical thinking.
That's worth it right there.
That was worth the price of admission.
Come into work and drink a bottle of water. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. And when I'm working with companies, I suggest that they put in the bathrooms these hydration charts. You've seen them, it's like
right. It's like the pain scale, but for your urine color.
Yeah. I say put those up.
Yeah.
Put those up in your bathroom so people can judge where they're at with their hydration, because a lot of the companies that I work with, their workers work outdoors, but the companies are not very good at keeping water readily accessible for their workers. So their workers do not hydrate properly. And then, you see these errors in decision making. And like, I'll talk to somebody that made a bad decision on an incident, and I'll say, well, what was your water consumption like that day? And they'll be like,
what?
Water? I drank like 3 cups of coffee in the morning and I went to work and I didn't have anything to drink all day. Okay, so now you're drinking a diuretic to rid yourself of more hydration, right, and not rehydrating. It's a factor.
And I imagine stress reduction too, whatever that looks like for that individual. But I know, in the shoot, don't shoot scenarios, the higher the officer's blood pressure is, the vastly more likely they'll make an incorrect decision.
Yeah, and the higher blood pressure is just a byproduct of increased stress.
Yeah.
The increase in stress causes heart rate to go up, blood pressure to go up, respirations to go up, pupils to dilate, release of brain chemicals, neurotransmitters, hormones, peptides, the whole
Oh,
concoction
yeah, right.
around up there. And so there's a lot happening. Blood pressure increase being one thing that can
A
compel
marker.
a
Yeah.
marker. Yeah, a marker. Good term.
Okay. Well, I remember when I did a movie called The Firm with Sidney Pollack.
Oh, I
And
just watched that.
you did? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I spent 4 months, working on that. Did all the practical special effects, the
Oh,
fire
nice.
and this, even things you'd never think of, or like the elevator dial moving as the elevator comes down and you're watching for it. That's just I'm just sitting there with a rheostat moving this little needle. There's no actual elevator there, right? But one of the things that Sidney Pollack did to reduce his stress and increase his decision capacity was the mono wardrobe. He had 10 identical shirts and 10 identical pairs of jeans. And he said, of all the decisions that I'm going to make today, this shouldn't be one of them. And so we're the same thing every day.
Well, I've heard the same of Mark Zuckerberg. That people's like he's always dressed so vanilla. And I saw an interview once where he said I've got 20 gray T-shirts and 20 green T-shirts, and I don't have to, I just pick up one and put it on. It's not, I don't have to burn mental horsepower trying to figure out the wardrobe. And yeah, it's the same thing.
Very interesting. Yeah. And I remember that was my first big movie that I managed all by myself. And I was under a lot of stress. And my brother handed me at the time a cassette, and it was called, Managing Stress. And I looked at it, and my first reaction was, great, just what I need, another thing to manage.
Oh, shoot, that's funny.
Yeah, awesome. Well, Rich, thank you so much for this going on hour and a half.
Yeah,
fascinating interview, fascinating topic, and I love what you've learned, and I love that you're so eager to share it, because that the wisdom you have accumulated saves 0 lives while it's stuck in your head, and that you only get to fulfill your dream of making people safer if you pass on what you've learned as much as you can, as fast as you can.
That's right. Exactly.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks
Dr.
for having me.
Rich Gasaway. Check them out. Is there a website I can refer people to?
The website is Situational Awareness Matters. Then the URL is SA for Situational Awareness, samatters.com.
Awesome. And don't confuse that for San Antonio.
No.
Matters.
No, yeah. Well,
matters.
San Antonio matters too.
It does. But situational matters
Situational awareness matters. On there is 500 and some blog articles that are all free. No membership required, no credit card required. Just go there and read them and use them. 410-ish podcast episodes that I've done on the topic, and they're all free. I hope that somebody would subscribe through their podcast player, iTunes or Google Play or whatever, but they don't have to. They can watch the episodes right on the website or on YouTube for free. I mean, there's nothing required of them.
Yeah. And the unintended benefit of studying situational awareness, besides the obvious, you're less likely to get killed on a call, is that you also get to smell the roses, right? You get that you notice more all the time, and thus experience a richer life. So
yeah, let me say one thing about that in closing.
Please do.
In 2019, two friends and I went on a 500-mile walk across Spain called the Camino de Santiago. And when I got back, a lot of people want to, how was it? What'd you do? What was it like? And I remember just tying right to what you said, how different the whole world is at 3 miles per hour.
Oh, sure.
You see so much more. You appreciate so much more. I took 6,000 some photographs on my iPhone of just a dog laying in the shade, or a flower that I had never seen before, or an ornament that was hanging on somebody's front door that, otherwise you would just go right past and not ever pay any attention to. And that's when I really first had my epiphany of how developed my situational awareness had become with a lot of practice over time.
Sure.
But holy cow, the stimulation that you get when you slow the whole world down and you're paying attention to everything, it was absolutely cathartic to do that. I mean, I don't know if I'd do it again. I'm a little older now, and walking 500 miles is quite grueling, but it was quite something to have that broadened awareness about everything happening.
We talked about when the world slows down, you see more of it. I want to keep you all day, but actually I do. But what's the flip side of that? When the world is going fast, but your brain increases its refresh rate to the point where the world appears to be in slow motion. And right, anyone who's ever had a car pull out in front of them and you hit the brakes and everything goes into slow motion, where all your brain power is going to process this, so you get that expanded time feeling. Tell me about that.
Yeah, that's called tachypsychia, and essentially it's psychological. Time really isn't slowing down. They actually had to do experiments to determine whether this was time really slowing down, and they did a really interesting experiment with someone doing bungee jumping, because they bungee jumped and they said, everything went, I was falling in slow motion and I come back up in slow motion. And what they did is they had a watch on their wrist and a way to record what, was like a video watching them and the watch.
Yeah, right.
Proving time really didn't slow down. I mean,
sure.
Not that necessarily we
as
had
if that needed to be proven in that case, right?
But so the slowing of time actually is happening inside the brain. Tachypsychia being the formal term for it, but that's like if someone they'll describe like they're in a car wreck and they're like the car was rolling in slow motion.
Right.
Well, it wasn't. I mean, your brain was processing it in equivalent of slow motion,
right?
But it was happening in real time.
But when you film something in slow motion, you're actually filming at a higher frame rate, right? And so I suspect that it's similar to that you're sampling data much faster with the possibility that you'll be able to use it more, right? That if all you see is the tiger went like that, like you don't know what to do. But if you slowly see that, then you move your hand this way. It gives you more opportunities to respond.
Yeah, there's so many
fascinating.
Yeah, there's so many weird things about all of it that I mean we can't dive into it because we'll end up with a 3-hour episode instead of a where we're at an hour and a half already.
Yeah. Right.
So maybe when we come back, we can dive deeper into some of the nuances of how our senses work, how our brain works, and how it all integrates. It's just so fascinating, but it's really easy for someone to get overwhelmed with it too, because it's some people would rather just get in the car, turn the key, and not think about what's happening under the hood.
I suppose, but I think that one of the reasons that situational awareness is so fascinating is because our entire experience of living is our situation, and so what you're studying and what you're teaching isn't just a topic for firefighters, cops, EMS workers. Like you're opening the hood on how we understand and appreciate our lives.
Yes, it transcends all aspects of our being.
Yeah.
I mean, there are some people that go through life lacking a lot of awareness, clueless about a lot of things, and most of them survive. They're not worse for the wear of it. And then there's some that go through with just a tremendous level of vigilance and awareness that they see and appreciate things so much differently than others. We're all living a very unique experience to each other, and And again,
A fact is a fact,
philosophical
but perception is reality, right?
to the individual, yes.
Yes, right. Awesome. Rich, thank you so much again. SA Matters is the web, samatters.com. It's the website. I know you're going to want to go check that out. And if you don't, if reading is not your thing, then just pop back in here with me in a month because we're going to spend some more time with Rich.
Okay.
Thanks so much for joining me on the Fire Break. Folks, you've been listening to a fascinating 90 minutes of conversation with Dr. Rich Gasaway, who is the SA Matters expert. Situational awareness is not just about, how to not get hurt on scene. It's about how to experience and appreciate life more, part of which means staying alive to do it. So it all ties together. You're listening to The Fire Break. I'm Steve Wolf. The Fire Break is sponsored by Team Wildfire. Check us out on the web at teamwildfire.com. Till next time, be safe, be careful. Wishing you well, and Happy New Year.